A billionaire left his wife over their child's skin color, but when he met her again, he was shocked. The name Victor Langston was synonymous with steel and glass scraping the Manhattan skyline. He was a titan of real estate, a man who saw the city not as a place of homes and lives, but as a chessboard of properties, assets, and calculated risks. His fortune, built on shrewd deals and an almost chilling detachment, was vast, insulating him within layers of luxury. Penthouses overlooking Central Park, private jets waiting on tarmacs, art collections curated purely for investment value. Yet, the opulence felt cold, the silence in his sprawling homes profound. Victor, in his late 30s, possessed a sharp intelligence, a commanding presence, and eyes the color of a winter sky, eyes that rarely showed warmth. His fair hair was meticulously styled, his suits impeccably tailored. He was the epitome of old-world East Coast wealth, mingled with the aggressive drive of new money, a combination that left little room for softness. His arrogance wasn't loud. It was a quiet, unshakable certainty in his own judgment, a belief fostered by a lineage that valued pedigree and appearance above all else. His family, the Langstons of Connecticut, were society stalwarts, their wealth inherited and carefully maintained. They moved in circles where deviations from the norm were met with raised eyebrows and whispered conversations. They had instilled in Victor a deep-seated awareness of appearances, of maintaining the facade, of associating with the right kind of people. It wasn't overt racism, not usually, but a subtle, pervasive prejudice against anything or anyone deemed other. It was at a stuffy museum gala, an event Victor attended purely out of obligation, that he first saw Elena Ramirez. She wasn't a guest. She was working, part of the catering staff, refilling champagne flutes with quiet efficiency. Amidst the practiced smiles and glittering jewels, her genuine warmth and the gentle grace in her movements caught his eye. She was beautiful, with expressive dark eyes, a cascade of wavy dark hair, and a smile that seemed to light her face from within. She was of Latina heritage, perhaps second or third generation American, carrying the richness of her culture with an unassuming dignity. Intrigued by her contrast to the brittle society women surrounding him, Victor, in a rare impulse, struck up a conversation. He was charmed by her lack of pretense, her quiet intelligence, her passion for art. She confessed she was taking night classes in art history. Elena, initially intimidated, found herself drawn to his sharp mind, and perhaps, naively, saw a flicker of something vulnerable beneath the polished exterior. For Victor, Elena was exotic, a departure from the predictable world he inhabited. He pursued her with the same focus he applied to his business deals. It was a whirlwind romance, conducted in the stolen hours between his demanding schedule and her multiple jobs and classes. He showered her with gifts, took her to restaurants she'd only dreamed of, momentarily blinded by infatuation, perhaps enjoying the subtle rebellion against his family's expectations. Elena, grounded and sensible, felt swept away but also hesitant. The differences in their worlds were stark. Her family, hardworking immigrants who ran a small neighborhood bakery in Queens, were loving and close-knit, their lives centered on community and simple joys. They were wary of Victor, his immense wealth casting a long, intimidating shadow. But Elena loved him, believing in the connection they shared, hoping his feelings were as genuine as hers. Against the unspoken but palpable disapproval of the Langston matriarch, Victoria Sr., Victor married Elena in a small, private ceremony 6 months after they met. The Langstons offered clipped congratulations, their smiles tight. Victoria Sr., a woman whose opinions were rarely challenged, made subtle digs, veiled comments about different backgrounds and maintaining the family line. Victor, caught between his infatuation and lifelong conditioning, brushed them off, perhaps wanting to prove he was his own man. The first year of marriage was a blend of happiness and underlying tension. Elena tried to navigate Victor's world, feeling like an outsider at formal dinners, her natural warmth often misinterpreted as naivete. Victor, in turn, seemed proud of her beauty, but also subtly controlling, guiding her wardrobe, her social interactions, trying to mold her into the image of a billionaire's wife. The genuine affection was there, but so were the cracks, his impatience, his focus on work, his sensitivity to his family's opinions. When Elena became pregnant, there was joy, but also a tremor of apprehension, mostly unfelt by the optimistic Elena, but palpable in Victor's strained silence whenever his mother called. Victoria Sr.'s comments became more pointed, laced with outdated and offensive notions about genetics. "One hopes the child takes after your side, Victor," she'd remarked coolly. "Strong genes are so important." She'd recount apocryphal family stories about distant relatives marrying unsuitably and the supposed undesirable traits that emerged generations later. These whispers, dripping with prejudice, found fertile ground in Victor's own ingrained biases he perhaps hadn't even fully acknowledged in himself. The birth of their daughter, Sophia, should have been the happiest day of their lives. Elena was exhausted but radiant, holding the beautiful, healthy baby girl. Sophia had a fuzz of dark hair, tiny perfect features, and when she eventually opened her eyes, they were a startling, clear blue, Victor's eyes. But her skin tone, from the very first hours, was a deep, warm brown, richer than Elena's own olive complexion, a clear inheritance from Elena's side of the family, perhaps hearkening back to indigenous or Afro-Latino roots deeper in her lineage. Victor stood frozen by the hospital bedside. The initial paternal pride he might have felt was instantly eclipsed by a cold wave of shock and, shamefully, disappointment. This child didn't look the way he had expected, the way a Langston heir should look in his prejudiced mind. She didn't fit the image. His mother's arrival at the hospital was toxic. Victoria Sr. took one look at the sleeping infant, and her lips thinned. Later, she cornered Victor in the hallway. "Victor, darling," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "Are you certain? The child is lovely, of course, but the coloring, it's rather pronounced. Elena is a sweet girl, but these things happen. Men can be taken advantage of." She hinted darkly at rumors, non-existent whispers she likely invented on the spot, playing on racist stereotypes and Victor's deepest insecurities about being deceived or looking foolish. Elena, recovering and blissfully unaware of the poison being poured into her husband's ear, simply adored her daughter. She tearfully tried to explain to a withdrawn Victor about her own family history, about recessive genes, about the beautiful tapestry of her heritage. "She has your eyes, Victor. Look, she's ours, completely ours," she pleaded, sensing his chilling distance. "My grandmother had skin this beautiful, this rich. It's part of who I am, who we are now." But the seeds of doubt, fertilized by his mother's malice and his own latent prejudice, had taken root. Consumed by suspicion and a warped sense of betrayal, Victor made a decision. Weeks after Sophia's birth, fueled by his mother's insistence and his own weak character, he secretly arranged for a DNA test, using hair follicles collected from Sophia's baby brush. He needed certainty, not for reassurance, but for confirmation of the suspicion he now almost welcomed. The results came back unequivocal. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. Sophia was his daughter. Any decent man would have been flooded with relief, perhaps shame at his own doubt. But for Victor Langston, the confirmation was a different kind of catalyst. It meant the problem wasn't infidelity, it was reality. It was the undeniable fact of his daughter's appearance, an appearance that clashed violently with his prejudiced worldview and the expectations of his family and social circle. He couldn't reconcile the image of this beautiful, brown-skinned baby with his vision of the Langston legacy. The confrontation was brutal and swift. He didn't yell. His voice was chillingly calm. He didn't accuse Elena of infidelity anymore. He knew it wasn't true. Instead, he twisted the narrative. He spoke of incompatibility, of irreconcilable differences, thinly veiled code for his inability to accept his own child. He implied that Elena had somehow misrepresented her background, that the strength of her genes was overwhelming his own, a nonsensical, racist deflection. He ignored Elena's heartbroken cries, her desperate pleas holding up Sophia, whose his blue eyes, stared unknowingly at the man rejecting her. "This isn't going to work, Elena," he stated, his face a mask of finality. "I can't. We can't." Because of her skin, Elena whispered, horrified, finally understanding the monstrous depth of his prejudice. "Because she looks like my family? Victor, she's your daughter." "It's better this way," he said, avoiding her gaze, unable to face the truth of his own cowardice. Within days, Victor Langston had vanished from their lives. His lawyers handled the swift, quiet divorce, offering a paltry, insulting settlement that Elena, in her shock and grief, barely registered before refusing out of pride. He instructed his staff, his family, everyone in his orbit, that Elena and the child were not to be contacted, not to be acknowledged. He cut them off completely, financially and emotionally, erasing them from his present as if they had never existed. Elena Ramirez, holding her infant daughter, found herself utterly alone, abandoned by the billionaire who had once charmed her, left destitute on the cold shores of his prejudice. Victor returned to his steel and glass towers, burying the silent, gnawing regret under mountains of work and a carefully constructed wall of indifference. He had made his choice, sacrificing love and fatherhood on the altar of appearance and shallow social standing. The 2 decades that followed saw Victor Langston's empire swell to staggering proportions. He became even more ruthless in his dealings, his emotional detachment proving a powerful asset in the cutthroat world of high-stakes real estate development. Skyscrapers bearing his name pierced the clouds in New York, Chicago, Miami. His wealth became legendary, his name a fixture on lists of the world's richest men. He remarried, predictably, to a woman approved by his mother, Camilla Albright, an heiress with impeccable lineage and a cool, detached elegance that mirrored his own. Their marriage was less a partnership and more a merger, a socially advantageous alliance devoid of the warmth he had briefly known with Elena. They maintained separate wings of the penthouse, their lives intersecting primarily at obligatory social functions. The marriage produced no children. Perhaps some buried part of Victor shied away from repeating the possibility of a child he couldn't accept, or perhaps the emotional void between them was simply too vast. Camilla died suddenly from an aneurysm 5 years into the marriage, leaving Victor even more isolated within his gilded cage. His mother, Victoria Sr., grew older, her influence still potent, but her presence less constant as her own health declined. Victor filled the echoing silence of his life with work. Board meetings, international negotiations, acquisitions. The relentless pace kept introspection at bay. He surrounded himself with sycophants and employees who knew better than to mention his brief first marriage. The past was a locked room, the key thrown away. Yet sometimes in the dead of night, staring out at the glittering, indifferent city from his penthouse window, a fleeting image would surface. Dark, pleading eyes, the weight of a tiny infant, the startling blue of his own eyes reflected in a small face. He would quickly push the thoughts away, pouring another glass of expensive scotch, attributing the unease to stress or fatigue. Regret was a weakness he couldn't afford. He convinced himself he had done the only logical thing, preserving the Langston image, making the hard choice. But the hollowness remained, a persistent ache beneath the surface of his success. Meanwhile, in the sprawling, vibrant, and often harsh reality of Queens, Elena Ramirez forged a different kind of life. The initial months after Victor's abandonment were a blur of grief, fear, and sheer survival. The meager savings she had quickly evaporated. Humiliation warred with a mother's fierce instinct to protect her child. Swallowing her pride, she moved from their modest apartment to a tiny, cramped walk-up in a less desirable neighborhood, relying on the kindness of strangers and the distant, cautious support of her own family, who were heartbroken for her but intimidated by the power Victor wielded. Elena worked tirelessly. She cleaned houses in affluent neighborhoods, the irony not lost on her. She took in sewing, her nimble fingers mending clothes late into the night, while Sophia slept in a makeshift crib beside her. She worked shifts as a caregiver for the elderly, her natural empathy a balm to others even as her own heart ached. Life was a constant struggle, stretching pennies, worrying about rent, patching Sophia's clothes, battling exhaustion. Yet, Elena refused to succumb to bitterness. Her focus was unwavering. Sophia. She poured all her love, strength, and resilience into raising her daughter. She instilled in Sophia a powerful sense of self-worth, celebrating her heritage, teaching her Spanish alongside English, sharing stories of her ancestors, ensuring Sophia knew that her beautiful brown skin was a gift, a mark of strength and history. She countered the inevitable whispers and sideways glances they sometimes encountered with quiet dignity and fierce maternal protection. "Your skin is like polished mahogany, mija," she'd say, tracing the curve of Sophia's cheek. "Rich and strong. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of who you are." Sophia grew up in a world vastly different from the one her father inhabited. It was a world of noisy streets, diverse communities, shared struggles, and profound kindnesses. She knew poverty, but she also knew overwhelming love. She was a bright, inquisitive child, absorbing her mother's values of compassion, hard work, and integrity. Despite limited resources, she excelled in school, her sharp mind and determination evident early on. She inherited Elena's warmth and gentle spirit, but beneath it lay a core of steel, forged in the knowledge of their abandonment and her mother's unwavering fight for their survival. She possessed Victor's blue eyes, a startling contrast against her complexion, a constant, visible link to the father she had never known, the man her mother spoke of rarely, and always with a carefully veiled pain. Elena found a community in her Queens neighborhood, other single mothers, immigrant families, people who understood struggle and supported each other. She volunteered at a local food pantry, sharing what little they had, teaching Sophia the importance of giving back. Sophia, growing into a young woman, often worked alongside her mother, her quiet competence and empathy making her a favorite among the center's clients. She saw the world with clear eyes, aware of injustice and inequality, but also filled with a desire to make a difference, fueled by her mother's example. By the time she was 20, Sophia was studying social work at a city college, juggling classes with part-time jobs, determined to build a future where she could help others, a future starkly different from the one Victor Langston had envisioned for his heir. Elena, watching her daughter blossom into a confident, compassionate young woman, felt a fierce pride that eclipsed the lingering sorrow of the past. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and in their small, love-filled world, they were rich in ways Victor Langston could no longer comprehend. Victor Langston rarely ventured into the outer boroughs, unless it was to survey a potential acquisition site from the tinted windows of his chauffeured limousine. However, a persistent PR executive on his team had been advocating for more community engagement to soften his public image, tarnished by a recent aggressive development deal that had displaced a number of small businesses. Reluctantly, Victor agreed to make an appearance at a well-established community center in Queens, one celebrating its 25th anniversary with a modest fundraising drive and a neighborhood outreach event. It was framed as a photo opportunity, a chance to demonstrate philanthropy, though Victor viewed it primarily as an irritating obligation. The community center buzzed with a different kind of energy than Victor was used to. Not the calculated networking of charity galas, but the genuine warmth of neighbors connecting. Music played from speakers, children chased each other in a nearby playground, and volunteers served food under colorful banners. Victor, flanked by a nervous aide, felt distinctly out of place in his bespoke suit, an island of cold formality in a sea of casual camaraderie. He shook a few hands, offered strained smiles for photos, already calculating how quickly he could leave. His gaze swept absently over the crowd, near a row of tables where volunteers were distributing bags of groceries and hot meals. And then it stopped. Cold. A woman stood behind one of the tables, handing a bag of rice to an elderly man. She was middle-aged, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled back simply. Lines of hardship and time were etched around her eyes and mouth, her hands roughened by work. She wore a simple apron over a worn dress. Yet, the set of her shoulders held an unmistakable dignity, and the gentle curve of her smile as she spoke to the man was achingly familiar. It couldn't be, but it was. Elena. Victor felt the air leave his lungs. 20 years dissolved in an instant. She looked older, tired, worn down by the life he had forced upon her. But the essence of her, the quiet grace, the innate kindness, remained untouched. He stood frozen, a maelstrom of emotions, shock, disbelief, a sudden, sharp pang of something akin to guilt, warring within him. As he watched, transfixed, a young woman moved through the crowd toward Elena. She was tall and slender, with the same cascade of dark, wavy hair as her mother, but her bearing was confident, almost defiant. She reached Elena, putting an arm around her shoulders, a gesture of easy affection. "Mom, they need more juice over by the kids' table," she said, her voice clear and warm. Then she turned slightly, looking towards the entrance, perhaps sensing the disturbance in the flow of the crowd caused by Victor's static presence. And Victor saw her face clearly for the first time. Her skin was the beautiful, rich brown that had so appalled him 2 decades ago, now radiant with youth and health. But her eyes were his. The same shape, the same startlingly clear, piercing blue. Her smile, as she glanced back at her mother, held the ghost of his own infrequent, genuine smiles. This was Sophia, his daughter, the undeniable proof of his paternity, and his prejudice stood before him, vibrant and alive. The carefully constructed walls around Victor's heart crumbled. The decades of denial, the suppressed regret, the manufactured indifference, it all shattered. He felt a trembling start in his hands, a tightness in his chest he hadn't experienced since he had last seen Elena's devastated face. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, drawn by an irresistible force. His aide tried to intercept him, murmuring about the schedule, but Victor waved him off, his eyes locked on the two women. He reached the edge of the table, his voice barely a whisper, hoarse with emotion. "Elena, is that you?" Elena looked up, her eyes widening fractionally in recognition, then immediately clouding with a complex mixture of pain, surprise, and guardedness. The gentle warmth vanished, replaced by a steely composure. "Victor," she acknowledged, her voice low and steady, devoid of welcome. Sophia turned fully, her blue eyes, so like his own, narrowing as she took in the expensive suit, the aura of immense wealth, the sudden tension radiating from her mother. Her gaze was sharp, assessing, and instantly protective. "Mom? Who is this?" Before Elena could answer, Victor spoke again, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Sophia." The name felt foreign and yet intimately familiar on his tongue. Elena stepped slightly in front of her daughter, a subtle shield. "Victor, what are you doing here?" Sophia's eyes flashed. "Who are you?" she demanded again, her tone laced with suspicion and an edge of hostility. "Why are you upsetting my mother?" The dam inside Victor finally broke. The decades of cold control evaporated, leaving raw, agonizing vulnerability. He looked from Elena's pained, proud face to Sophia's fierce, questioning one. I knew." He choked out, the confession tumbling forth, ragged and broken. "Right after she was born, Sophia, I did a DNA test. I knew she was mine." Elena gasped softly, a fresh wave of pain washing over her face. Sophia stared, her expression hardening into disbelief and dawning fury. "I knew," Victor repeated, tears now streaming freely down his face, heedless of his public image, of the onlookers who were beginning to stare. He sank to his knees on the worn pavement, the unfamiliar posture of submission feeling both alien and terrifyingly right. "I knew, and I still left. My mother, the pressure, my own damned arrogance and stupidity, the prejudice I was raised with." He struggled for words, the shame overwhelming him. "I saw her skin, and I panicked. I was a coward. I listened to whispers, but mostly I listened to the worst parts of myself. I convinced myself it was the only way." He looked up at Elena, his vision blurred by tears. "You weren't wrong, Elena. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. I didn't just leave you. I threw away the only real thing I ever had. I lost everything that mattered because of my ignorance, my blindness." Sophia watched him, her beautiful face a mask of cold anger. She reached out and gripped her mother's hand tightly, a silent gesture of solidarity. Elena's expression was unreadable, a deep well of sorrow and resilience. "Get up," Elena said quietly, her voice firm despite the tremor Victor could detect beneath it. "Don't make a scene here." Victor slowly, unsteadily got to his feet. He felt stripped bare, exposed under the afternoon sun and the weight of 20 years of consequences. Sophia's blue eyes, so like his own, held no flicker of recognition or pity, only judgment. And he knew, with a certainty that cut deeper than any business loss, that he deserved it. The air crackled with unspoken history, with the raw wound Victor had just ripped open. Onlookers kept a respectful distance, sensing the gravity of the moment, but their curious glances felt like physical blows to Victor. Sophia's glare was unwavering, a blue-eyed indictment. Elena, however, seemed to draw herself up, her exhaustion momentarily replaced by a profound, quiet strength. "You come here after 20 years, Elena said, her voice low but carrying. "And you think tears and kneeling will change anything?" "No," Victor whispered, shaking his head. "I don't know what I thought. I just seen you both. We build a life, Victor," Elena continued, her gaze sweeping over the community center, the volunteers, the people they served. "A life without you. A good life, despite everything you did. Sophia doesn't need your money. She doesn't need your name." "I know," Victor said, his voice thick. "I can see that." He looked at Sophia, at her confidence, her obvious connection to her mother and the community. "She's remarkable." A flicker of something, pride, perhaps, softened Elena's expression for a bare second before hardening again. "She is. No thanks to you." Sophia finally spoke, her voice tight with controlled fury. "You knew? You knew I was your daughter, and you left my mother with nothing? Because you didn't like my skin color?" The words hung in the air, stark and ugly. Victor flinched. "Yes," he admitted, the shame burning him. "It was prejudice. Cowardice. There's no excuse." "No," Sophia agreed coldly. "There isn't." She looked ready to turn away, to dismiss him as completely as he had dismissed them. But Elena put a gentle hand on her daughter's arm. She looked directly at Victor, her dark eyes searching his tear-streaked face. "Words are easy, Victor, especially for men like you. 20 years of silence can't be erased by 5 minutes of regret." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "If there is anything left of a conscience in you, if this isn't just another performance, then show us. Don't tell us." Victor stared at her, grasping the lifeline she had, perhaps unintentionally, thrown him. "How?" he asked desperately. "Tell me what to do." "Anything." Elena gestured towards the table laden with groceries. "We need help distributing the food. People are waiting." It was a simple, practical command, yet it felt monumental. Victor, the man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, hesitated. His suit felt impossibly restrictive. His hands, accustomed to signing billion-dollar deals, felt clumsy and useless. Sophia watched him with open skepticism. Taking a deep breath, Victor stripped off his expensive suit jacket, folded it awkwardly, and handed it to his stunned aide without a word. He rolled up the sleeves of his pristine white shirt. "Okay," he said, his voice still shaky. "Okay." He spent the rest of that afternoon working alongside Elena and Sophia. His movements were clumsy at first. He nearly dropped a bag of potatoes, fumbled with tying plastic bags, felt sweat prickle his brow under the unaccustomed physical exertion and the weight of scrutiny. He saw the stark reality of need in the faces of the people lining up. The elderly woman whose hand trembled as she accepted a loaf of bread. The young mother juggling 2 small children and a bag of groceries. It was a world away from his sanitized existence. He tried to speak to Sophia, simple questions about her studies, but her answers were clipped, her demeanor frosty. She worked with practiced efficiency, her focus entirely on the task at hand, offering him no quarter. Elena was polite but distant, directing him occasionally, her expression revealing nothing. Yet for the first time in decades, Victor felt something other than numb ambition or hollow regret. He felt the burn of honest work, the quiet satisfaction of a shared task, the profound discomfort of being utterly out of his depth. At one point, reaching for the same bag of apples, his hand brushed against Sophia's. Her skin was warm, alive. She flinched back as if burned, her blue eyes flashing with renewed anger. Victor pulled his hand away instantly, murmuring an apology. The brief contact, the jolt of shared genetics and starkly different lives, sent a shiver through him. As the event wound down and the sun began to set, painting the Queen's sky in hues of orange and purple, Victor stood amidst the packing up, feeling drained and utterly lost. Elena approached him. "You should go," she said quietly. "Elena, I want to help." "More than this," Victor stammered. "You said show you. One afternoon handing out rice doesn't absolve you, Victor." "I know that," he insisted, frustration mixing with desperation. "What can I do? I have resources." "We don't want your money handouts," Sophia cut in sharply, overhearing him as she stacked empty boxes. Victor looked at the determined young woman who was his daughter. "It's not just about money," he said, surprising himself. "Your mother, she mentioned this center. Education, opportunity." An idea began to form, born not of PR strategy, but of a genuine desire to bridge the chasm he had created. What if I could help build something lasting? Here, for the community. An educational center, maybe? Tutoring, scholarships for kids who need a chance. Elena and Sophia exchanged a look. Skepticism warred with the undeniable potential of such an offer. "Why?" Sophia asked bluntly. "To make yourself feel better?" "Partly," Victor admitted honestly, meeting her gaze. "Maybe mostly. But does the reason matter if the result is good? If it helps children, like you, get the opportunities they deserve?" He looked at Elena. "Let me try. Please. Not for me. For them. For the future." Elena was silent for a long moment, studying his face. "This community needs resources, Victor," she said finally. "Badly. If you are serious, truly serious, this can't be about naming rights and photo ops. It has to be real. It has to be guided by the people who live here, who know what's needed." "Absolutely," Victor agreed quickly. "Whatever you say, I'll fund it. But I want to be involved. Not just writing checks. I want to understand. I want to learn." The next few months were a tentative, arduous process. Victor, true to his word, began liquidating certain assets. Not just expendable luxuries like a yacht or a secondary penthouse, but significant holdings that signaled real commitment. He hired architects and planners, but crucially, he insisted they hold community meetings, listening sessions chaired by Elena and other neighborhood leaders. He attended these meetings himself, sitting silently at the back initially, just listening to the needs, the hopes, the skepticism of the residents. He learned about the lack of after-school programs, the outdated library resources, the need for vocational training, the dreams of college deferred due to cost. He started spending more time in Queens, not in his limousine, but walking the streets, visiting the existing center, awkwardly trying to engage in conversations. Sophia remained his harshest critic and most significant hurdle. She watched his every move with suspicion, questioning his motives, challenging his assumptions. She refused his offers of financial help for her own education, fiercely independent. Yet, she didn't entirely shut him out. She saw the genuine effort, the way he listened intently during community meetings, the slow erosion of his innate arrogance as he confronted the realities of the lives impacted by systemic inequality, an inequality his own wealth represented. Elena acted as a cautious bridge. She met with Victor regularly to discuss the plans for the new center, her practical insights invaluable. She maintained a careful distance, never letting him forget the past, but also acknowledging the potential good he could do. She allowed him brief, supervised visits to their small apartment for planning sessions, awkward affairs where Victor felt the full weight of the life they had lived without him. He saw Sophia's worn textbooks, the simple meals they shared, the love and resilience that permeated their tiny home. He learned about Sophia's passion for social work, her dream of opening a family counseling service in the neighborhood. He started asking questions, not just about the center, but about her. Her life, her friends, her hopes. Slowly, glacially, Sophia began to respond, sharing small details, challenging his worldview, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege and prejudice. The path to redemption was not paved with grand gestures alone, but with the painstaking, humble work of listening, learning, and consistently showing up. It was the hardest work Victor Langston had ever done. Months turned into a year. The shell of the new educational center, funded by Victor's divestments and designed with community input, began to rise on a formerly vacant lot near Elena's apartment. Victor was a frequent presence at the site, not just for inspections, but often just observing, sometimes awkwardly trying to help with minor tasks, shedding the remnants of his billionaire persona piece by piece. He learned the names of the construction workers, shared coffee from thermoses, listened to their stories. His relationship with Sophia remained the most complex piece of the puzzle. The anger was still there, a justifiable shield she kept firmly in place. But beneath it, cracks of curiosity and perhaps a grudging respect were beginning to show. She saw his sustained commitment, his willingness to be uncomfortable, his genuine interest in the project that was taking shape, a project that would directly benefit the community she loved. She saw him wrestle with his own ingrained assumptions, sometimes failing, but always trying again. He learned to navigate her sharp intellect and sharper questions. He started sharing tentative pieces of his own life. Not the successes, but the emptiness, the loneliness he hadn't acknowledged for years, the hollow victory of his immense wealth. He spoke of his own upbringing, the subtle and overt pressures that shaped his prejudices, not as an excuse, but as context. He admitted his profound regret, not just for the abandonment, but for the years of fatherhood he had missed, the person he had failed to be. The turning point came unexpectedly on a bleak, rainy afternoon in late autumn. Victor had stopped by Elena's apartment after a site visit, ostensibly to drop off some updated blueprints. Elena was out running errands, leaving Victor and Sophia in the small, familiar living room. Rain lashed against the window pane. Sophia was studying at the worn kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks. An awkward silence stretched between them. Victor, unsure what to say, commented on the weather. Sophia gave a non-committal grunt. Then, looking up from her book, she asked a question that surprised him with its directness. "Were you ever happy? With her?" "My mother." Victor was taken aback. He thought for a long moment, remembering the whirlwind romance, the genuine warmth that had drawn him in. "Yes," he said quietly, honestly. "I was happier than I realized at the time, before I let everything else get in the way, before I broke everything." Sophia absorbed this, her blue eyes searching his face. Then, her expression clouded. She spoke about a recent challenge she'd faced at her internship, dealing with a family resistant to help, the frustration, the feeling of helplessness. She spoke not seeking advice, but simply processing, perhaps testing him, seeing if he could just listen. Victor didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He just listened, nodding, acknowledging her frustration. He saw not just his daughter, but a dedicated, passionate young woman grappling with the complexities of the world. When she finished speaking, a heavy silence fell again, filled only by the drumming rain. "It's hard," Victor said softly, "trying to fix things, trying to connect when people push you away." He wasn't just talking about her internship. Sophia looked at him, a long, assessing gaze. The anger seemed to recede, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. Perhaps she saw a reflection of her own struggles, or perhaps she finally glimpsed the broken man beneath the billionaire facade, the man grappling with the wreckage of his own choices. She took a deep breath. "Dad," the word hung in the air, tentative, fragile. Victor froze, his heart lurching. Had he heard correctly? Sophia looked down, a faint flush rising on her cheeks. "The rain is letting up," she finished, her voice barely audible. But he had heard it. That single syllable, loaded with 20 years of absence and a year of painstaking effort. Tears welled in Victor's eyes, not the tears of performative regret from their first reunion, but tears of profound, unexpected gratitude. He didn't rush towards her, didn't overwhelm the moment. He simply nodded, his throat tight. "Yes," he managed to say. "Yes, it is." When Elena returned minutes later, she found them sitting in comfortable silence, the tension that usually defined their interactions replaced by a quiet, almost peaceful atmosphere. She didn't ask what had happened, but she saw the subtle shift in Sophia's demeanor, the unshed tears glistening in Victor's eyes. That rainy afternoon wasn't a magical fix. The scars remained. Sophia didn't suddenly forget the pain of her childhood or the source of her mother's hardships. Elena didn't instantly forgive the man who had shattered her life. But it was a beginning, a foundation, fragile but real, upon which something new could be built. In the months that followed, Dad was used more often, still tentatively at times, but with growing naturalness. The educational center opened, named simply the Queen's Community Learning Hub, as Elena had insisted. It quickly became a vital neighborhood resource. Victor was a regular volunteer, tutoring math, mentoring young entrepreneurs, finding a quiet satisfaction in contributing that dwarfed any pleasure his billions had ever provided. He learned alongside the students, humbled by their resilience and ambition. He established a significant, independently managed trust fund for Sophia, ensuring her future financial security without making it a tool of control. Sophia, while appreciative, continued forging her own path, graduating with honors and starting her career in social work, often utilizing the resources of the hub. The three of them began to form a new kind of family unit. They shared occasional meals, sometimes in Elena's cozy apartment, sometimes exploring neutral territory in the city. The conversations were often awkward, navigating the minefield of the past, but they were happening. Victor learned about Elena's family traditions, tasted her cooking, listened to stories about Sophia's childhood, moments he had irrevocably missed, but whose echoes he could now appreciate. Elena slowly let her guard down, allowing herself to see the genuine change in Victor, though a core of sadness for what might have been always remained. Victor Langston never fully shed his reputation as a ruthless businessman, but those who knew him saw the transformation. He channeled more of his wealth into targeted philanthropy, guided by Elena and Sophia's insights into community needs. He spent less time in boardrooms and more time at the hub, or simply sharing quiet evenings with his daughter and the woman he had wronged so profoundly. His lavish penthouse often felt empty, but he was no longer truly alone. He had found his family, not through restoring a broken past, but by painstakingly building a new present based on humility, amends, and the quiet power of showing up. On a sunny afternoon, watching Sophia laugh as she helped a young girl sound out words in the bright, busy library of the hub, Victor felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't known existed. He hadn't regained what he'd thrown away 20 years ago. That was impossible. But in losing his fortune's grip on his soul, and in embracing the daughter he once rejected, Victor Langston had finally discovered a measure of true worth. The journey was far from over, the foundations still fragile, but for the first time in decades, he looked towards the future not with emptiness, but with a tentative, hard-earned hope.